and they write down the names of 3 kids in that class, and they would go in and they would tell the teacher. They pick these 3 kids at random now, and they go in and tell the teacher that these 3 kids are especially intelligent, especially talented, but don't let them know that you're aware of it. And those kids inevitably would perform, even though he doesn't say anything to them. There's something different in the way he treats them, behaves, that encourages them to think better of themselves, and they perform at a higher level. And it showed up again and again as a success story. You know, get people to believe in themselves, they can do almost anything. Well, I wouldn't go that far, but they can do pretty well.
It's fascinating, Jack. No, it was
well, then the obvious question, Jack, is what was that first story about?
Well,
what was that first story about, Jack?
The first story was about a guy who, it was my own story, actually. It was a guy who worked at a post office. And he falls in love with a young lady, another one of the clerks. But every time he gets close to her, he freezes up. He can't, all she'll do, he figures, is turn him down. What finally happens is that a letter arrives from, I can't remember who it is. My memory doesn't work as well as it used to. But from some guy in the 1850s, a well-known writer, who uses the line about it. That was an actual line about if you can learn to believe in yourself, you can do almost anything. And he made his charge with the young woman, and of course he succeeds. And the story sold. And I realized afterwards that I'd actually been writing about myself, about taking the plunge. You don't just turn yourself off, but go ahead, go do it, make it happen. That's the advice I gave to a lot of my students.
So did it happen? I mean, I've heard stories of writers who after the first one, every idea comes easy and you're selling stuff left and right. Did it? Or were you wishing you were back to teaching?
No, I never went. I never really. The first story I wrote was when I was in the Customs Service. It was after I had my teaching career was over. And that was the first story. And that was what's on. That first story sold. And after that, I knew I could do it. And I started writing stories, and then I got an invitation. I didn't think I could write a novel, but I got an invitation to write a novel for, I don't really remember now who it was. I should have written some of this stuff down before we came in here. But I got an invitation to write a novel. There was a series of novels written by first time novelists. This is back in the 60s. And it did fine. It won an award. So it just looked as if I couldn't go wrong. I just stayed with it. And the thing that's done to me is shown me that most people, the vast majority of people, are smarter than they realize. And if we can just come to recognize our own skills, we do a lot better.
It's a very astute remark. So it's lots of lessons learned, I guess. So, one of the things that I always wonder, and some of us in this group fashion ourselves as writers of some sort, but certainly nothing like the prolific writer you are. Where do you get your ideas from? How do you come up with a storyline?
I've always liked Harlan Ellison's response to that question, which was someplace in New York. I've forgotten the town, but that's where the ideas come. The things that happen to you. I've had a number of experiences where I remember going into we were in Canada and visited a Canadian Air Force place, and they had a lot of stuff dedicated to the writers who had the pilots who had been in World War II. And I still remember they had to sign about they will never grow old was the way the sign read. It kind of stuck in my mind. And I thought, about the plane. I started thinking about a bomber. Okay, so suppose you got a bomber back there It's a left bomber from World War II, and it's useless now. There's nothing for it anymore. And then I took it one step further. I thought, well, instead of being a bomber, how about if you've got an interplanetary vehicle? And we've discovered there's nobody out there, so it's time to give up. And of course, you don't give up. You never give up. And that was the way the story went. Make something happen. I forgot what the story title. I've written a lot of them now. And I can't keep titles in my head so much, but story did fine.
I'm sure. So
another.
Go ahead.
Pardon?
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I remember sitting in a restaurant one time and people coming in there was the attitude in the restaurant changed, and it turned out that there had been an attack. It might have been the 9/11 attack, come to think of it. But and I'm not sure what I did with it, but I turned that into a story also. Not the attack itself, but people sitting in a restaurant and suddenly becoming aware that something's happened somewhere. But story ideas can come from a number of places, and it's what happens. What happens with a kid when you tell a kid that this is the last starship and we're not going to use it anymore, and that's just not going to fly.
Interesting. Always interesting to listen to you. I'm always get fascinated, Jack.
Tony, you're one of the great human beings of our time.
I take that with a lot of humility, but thank you. I know that in one of your books, there was a character you created called Alex Benedict. And I believe
he did 8 of them.
Yes, that's true. You did 8 of them. And he was a seeker of alien artifacts and the central figure. How did you develop the character?
Excuse me. I've always been interested in archaeology, just as I am in astronomy. I never became an archaeologist either. But I'll tell you, I like mysteries, but I don't care much for ordinary run-of-the-mill mysteries where people are simply getting murdered. And let's find out who done it. I get fairly bored fairly quickly watching those things. I won't get into a lot of side effect stuff, but I love mysteries, and having a guy who looks for artifacts, solves historical mysteries, you got a much more interesting situation than you do, rather than somebody who's just turning around, just chasing around the bad guy and trying to figure out why they murdered so and so. So that's how I got into that kind of thing. I like the kind of mysteries you can do, and it caught well. The first one, there was the original plot line was a hero in an interstellar war who had behaved out of character, and that was basically why did he behave out of character. I love the Father Brown stories, not the ones on television, because they are only whodunits. I don't know why they took Father Brown. That is as good a series of detective stories as you'll find anywhere, because he does not just do mysteries that are involved with murders. In fact, usually there aren't murders. But when they turned it into the television series, that's all it is chasing down the murderers. But for example, Father Brown is at in a place where there's a military award set up for a general who always spent time making sure that he kept the casualties to his people at a minimum, taking care of his own people, except once. There was one thing, and nobody understood why this was. They charged a mountain, they sent people up, and the enemy was up there in this place, and his own soldiers got riddled It was a terrible thing. Why did he do it? Why did he step out of character that one time? And Father Brown has figured it out. And the reason he did it is that a colonel had seduced his wife, and he murdered the colonel. And where do you hide a tree? In a forest.
Fascinating.
Okay.
Fascinating. Dan, and Jack, I have we ask some of our viewers if they have a question to write in. And so I have a question from Christopher Collins. And Chris asks, how do you start writing? What is your process? Do you start with a plot, characters, an outline, or somewhere else?
If it's a novel, I need to know two things basically. One is where it starts, and I need to know what the climax is going to look like. Now, sometimes the climax doesn't look anything like what I originally planned, but that's all right. You have to keep your mind open and be willing to make changes. Short story, I need to know what it's about. I just submitted a story to Asimov's a couple of weeks ago, in which a guy living in not Slovenia, someplace in north of Russia, and he's getting a very strange visitor, a woman, who's telling him about things that are going to happen tomorrow and next day, and she even gives him the scores of some basketball games, and the scores are dead on. And the woman, what I wanted to do, I decided I would like to do a time travel story, but the time travel stories always have people, either us going into the past or people in the future coming to visit us. I thought a nice idea would be to have somebody from the past come to visit us. Who from the past? And it occurred to me that the right person to have would be Albert Einstein's wife, who never got credit for all the work she did. So she comes, at least she invents a time machine, comes forward, and figures that's the way she'll wind up getting some credit for herself. She won't just disappear in the history the way she did.
That's very cool.
Thank you. I hope they think so at Asimov's.
Well, you mentioned Asimov's magazine, which of course is one of the remaining pulps out there with short stories. And lo and behold, you surprised the heck out of us at Neutral Zone Studios a few months ago when you told us that we were in one of them. So why don't you tell us the genesis of what's coming up in the, I forget, I think it's in the
November-December issue.
November-December edition, which features our Georgia film studio.
Yeah, that should be out any time. The story is about a group. It's about basically it's about the group you guys have in the Neutral Zone. People who are doing Star Trek movies. And what happens is that we have decided that interstellar travel, faster than the only way you can do this is faster than light. Otherwise, you're going to be 200 years getting somewhere. So you got to have faster than light. The problem is that faster than light, everybody right now is pretty much convinced it's impossible. So if you have a storyline in which ultimately some guys discovered what's been going on with your people, where they made up some stories with this Star Trek thing, and a couple of discs survive about 100 years into the future, and people see it and think, boy, wouldn't it be great if we had faster than light travel and could really do this stuff like these guys do, like Jim Kirk and these guys here, and they get the physicists going on it again, and they find a way to do it and create basically a real Star Trek. Faster than light travel really moves. So we go into the universe, which we would never have done had it not been the people doing the Star Trek stuff.
Well, it's been great because you have come to visit us in Kingsland from Brunswick a few times, and we've held some fan events. And I've even got a photo somewhere of you in the captain's chair. But imagine our surprise when you said you'd gotten an idea, you know, to use that Genesis and your archaeology love. The studio's remains are found in the future, and that's what kicks this whole thing off. And initially, they think it's the Star Trek studios from the 60s, and then they realize it isn't. So
Yeah, that's right.
I won't give any more away.
I can also tell you, by the way, that the idea came to me while when I was there a few months ago. You invited me in to talk to a group of them, and we got talking about stuff like that. And somebody suggested the idea. Either I might have, or it might have been somebody in the group. I don't know. I don't remember. But I took it and ran with it.
Well, it certainly wasn't me because I'm not that smart. Jumping in, we have another question from someone who's viewing, and that's Bob Kenny. And Bob asks, when writing science fiction, what kind of research do you do?
Zero. I'm too prone to make mistakes with regard to that. So if I need to know something about the physics of star travel in some way, I don't go try to look it up myself. I call a physicist. If I want details about what would a star cluster look like up close, so you can get close to one, I call an astronomer and ask. If I want to know what would you see in a star that would persuade you that the star is artificial, I go to an astronomer or a physicist. And the experience I have with that is that they love it. I still remember the guy when I asked about, how would you know that a star was an artificial construct? What could tell you that? Oh, Jesus Christ! God, listen, kid, I'll get back to you. And a lot of them go like that. Yeah, these guys get, because they're completely off the wall issues that they don't normally run into, I think. If I went and tried to read this stuff myself and get it studied, I would never get it right. It's too complicated. I'm just not bright enough, to be honest. I wanted to be an astronomer when I first started out, and I figured out pretty quickly that was just not going to work for me. Better to write about the stars than try to get too close to them.
But yet you have predicted things, and I maybe it's your own imagination or people you talk to. One of my favorites is the virtual assistants, and the fact that even if a person is dead, the artificial intelligence can create them as they might be, so that your characters can interview them and try to get some ideas to the mystery they're trying to solve.
Yeah, that might be possible. I don't know. Nobody was prepared to tell me that it couldn't be done. There are aspects like that where you don't really know what is possible. Is telepathy possible? I don't know.
And you have an alien race who are telepaths, right?
That's correct.
Yep.
I got something else coming up that's telepathic. A forest.
Did you say
Okay.
a forest?
Yes.
Forest is telepathic.
I guess you can't see the leaves through the trees.
There's a major effort that goes on where they have to rescue a tree.
Interesting.
For all the futuristic stuff that you talk about, what I've enjoyed most about your books is they're grounded in human beings. Your characters have the same loves. They love to go out to find restaurants, to have a good drink. They want to go to a country house. You still have news media, even newspapers in there. I love the technique you use in some of your novels where a headline or two or three becomes a counterpoint or a chapter break, and it gives you that little image of the world they're living in and what the characters are living through, and then you get back to the story. It's a great way to like put in a little, here's what's happening now back to our story.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I'm trying to remember who I got that from. USA. There was a series of books, I think a 3-volume set called USA, and I can't off the top of my head remember who wrote them, but that was where I found that, and that works beautifully in there.
And of course, the funny thing is you're actually putting in the gossip stuff. You have Hollywood stars or famous TV or vid stars, and you see the sublime and stupid part of the world they're living in, along with the military conflicts, and then that headline that says, is star travel still needed or usable, especially when we get into the Priscilla Hutchins novels?
Yeah. Yeah,
Where
go ahead, that's all right.
Where did Hutch come from? I mean, she starts out as a star pilot, then heaven forbid, toward the end, she's an administrator who wants to get back out there, and it just seems like there's no interest in space travel in her timeline until things happen.
Yeah, I know. I been giving some thought. I want to think I'd like to go back to Priscilla and do a closeout novel, change everything. I have to figure out how to do that. I've been sort of promising myself that the novel I'm working on now is going to be my last novel, but I probably will wind up doing one more with Priscilla. Anyway, I like her and I miss her. It's an interesting thing. You know, the women in those novels actually come alive for me. Priscilla's there, and Chase Colpath. They live. They have the. It's odd, and I miss them.
Well, Chase is the narrator of Alex Benedict's novels. We're seeing things from her viewpoint, which is certainly refreshing. And she's had her own troubles with Alex and wondering sometimes if he was a bounty hunter or looking for profit and then not. So,
you know, I think the one I'm working on now probably will be the last in the Alex Benedict novels. I'm trying to wind things up, but who knows? I just don't know. I can't look ahead and predict these things.
Well, 30 plus novels, and I don't even know how many short stories. So maybe you do have the ability to rest on your laurels and snap a few short stories out there to keep life interesting.
I hope so. I appreciate it, Dan. I like the encouragement. It helps.
Well, short story short, I've had the chance of reviewing a lot of your books, and that's how I got to meet you.
And I actually that brings up a question that I'm thinking, and this is a question from me. But you do have some very voluminous novels, meaning you've got a series of 8, or at least you have a series of novels. When you create your first story and then get it into the format you'd like as a novel, have you planned ahead for the use of the characters and subsequent stories, or does that just kind of happen as it happens?
I promised myself when I started that I would not do any series. I would never do a series. I wanted no continuing characters. The main reason for it was that you have to keep all the details in your head, and that's almost impossible to do. The character was born in such and such a place or whatever. You have a tendency to get it wrong later on. You forget the details. And it becomes too much to keep track of. You get in the 7th or 8th book and say anything at all about the character, and you want to go back. You kind of have to go back and run a search and make sure you got that, whether she was born in what's his name or whatever. It's too much. So I decided I would not do it. So one of my very early novels was a novel that easily could have been an Alex Benedict novel. It was a mystery. Female character as the and a friend. There's a it's a long story. I shouldn't get into it, but it's a story that would have been perfect for Alex Benedict. It's Infinity Beach is the title. I didn't do it for Alex Benedict, but I afterward I regretted it. And then when I hit another mystery novel, I wound up going back for Alex, and then I kind of stayed with him because it's a perfect situation. How many times can I do? What I like to do is historical mysteries. How many times can I do an historical mystery or an archaeological mystery, and I have to bring in a different lead character every time? That's just not going to work.
Well, it's interesting. Your love of archaeology, like I said, shows up a lot because a lot of what Alex is doing is going to archaeological sites and then solving mysteries. But yet, the sad part is it seems like your series, a lot of your books, there's no aliens out there, or there's one or two races. It's like we're alone out there. Isn't that anti-sci-fi writer?
Yeah, I guess it is. I don't know. As far as I know, I'm not aware of who else has been doing anything like that. Everybody else seems to have lots of aliens around, and I wanted to go in a different direction, so that was the direction I took. Yeah, no,
And the only
it was just my feeling. I loved asking the question about an empty universe. What does it say about us if we're living in an empty universe?
And then the only aliens really that are in one of the series are the mutes. And they're not nice, or are they? We don't know. You sort of still leave that hovering.
Well, they're okay. We have a problem with them because they read everything we think. They can live in your mind, and that makes humans very uncomfortable. Understandably. Of course, Chase Colpath, when they're around, spends most of her time trying not to think anything that's indecent, which of course becomes impossible when you. But I think I'm kind of sorry I decided to make them telepaths. I'm not sure why. I just don't feel comfortable with telepaths running around in one of those books. But anyway, I've got if it'll make anybody happy, there are some aliens going to show up in the novel I'm working on now.
Good to hear. Good to hear. How about, we talked earlier about your background, and you're a teacher and you've been in the Navy. Does that influence your writing at all?
Well, it certainly influenced who I am. So yeah, it must. It must. If I hadn't gone into the Navy, I'd have become somebody completely different. The Navy, my 4 years in the Navy gave me a lot of confidence in myself, and also taught me to be kind of humble. And I know that sounds as if it's cross purposes, but I knew too many people who'd been. I had a very close friend who was a Navy captain. I got involved with him because he was an ardent chess player. I loved playing chess, and his name was Scotty Parrish. He became the commanding officer at the base where I was. But I watched that guy, the way he operated, and saw some of the bosses I had later in civil life. For example, when I had a couple of strange ones when I was in the Customs Service, guys who were primarily involved in just taking care of themselves and not worried about anything else, who thought the thing that they were supposed to do was yell at everybody all the time. So I think I learned a lot from my naval experience, and I learned a lot from teaching. Also, that didn't much have a lot to do with bosses. It had to do with the kids that I was with. You see what happens, what works with kids, and it makes you a lot smarter, I think, in dealing with other human beings. So I wouldn't have missed that. You know, there are, you know, I think all of us, there are things we would like to go back and change if we could. There are a few things I did when I was young that they would be the first places I go to if I could change something. For example, I had a close friend who collapsed during a basketball game, the captain of our baseball team. And he asked me don't tell my wife. No, we were both in our, about 26, 27, somewhere in there. Don't tell my wife, what are they going to want me to get to a doctor and all that kind of thing. So I kept my mouth shut. And a week later, he was gone. He had an aneurysm. They might have been able to do something if they had known about it ahead of time. Yeah, we make mistakes. You have to deal with that.
We definitely do, and you know what? At some point in our lives, you're right. We kind of think about those things, and we certainly sometimes regret them. But you know what? It's part of, I guess, being human. And you know, one of the lessons that I learned, I long story short, but one of the lessons I learned is you can't change the past. You can only learn from it.
Yeah, that's certainly correct.
Yeah.
Don't do anything like that again.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask a question here, Jack. I remember I interviewed you years ago, and we joked about the fact that you were like a certain soap opera star we knew, where you were always nominated but never won. And then in 2006, you got a Nebula Award for Seeker, about a legendary lost spaceship. Go back to 06 and the fact that here you were a nominee, but never a bridesmaid and never the bride, and then suddenly you won.
That was a nice feeling. I'll give it that.
And where did the idea for Seeker come from? I mean, that's going back now. People may have to go dig up a paperback on that somewhere to use bookstore, but I actually read that long before I started talking to you.
Yeah, and I couldn't tell you where the idea came from. It's just too long ago to get the source. But you know, it was there. It was the kind of storyline that I liked. It was it was a mystery without a villain. I don't want any villains if I can help it. It was just historical events and try to track down what really happened here.
You know, maybe. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's all right. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I want to just remind people that, and it looks like, you know, we have some people who may have come in a little late. And certainly after this, if anyone's out there that would like to meet Jack and have the opportunity to get an autographed novel from him, and we will put you on a live feed, please take a look at our webpage, and there is a link. It's neutralzonestudios.com/shop/products/Jack-McDevitt. And if you'd like to meet Jack once we're done here, just let us know. I mentioned a couple of people may have come in late. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions that people have written in. And if I'm repeating something, forgive me, but
Sure.
I just want to read them. So James Michael Roddy asks, who's your publisher and how did you get started?
Well, I've had about 4 publishers over the years. How did I get started? Well, that story I told earlier, that was my wife persuaded me to write one story, write the story, send it in, see how it goes. And that was how I got started. It sold. And that was that was my launch point.
And you told us earlier before we got started that you've been married for
53 years now.
Congratulations, really. Congratulations.
I think probably Maureen deserves the congratulations. He's the one who's had to put up with me all that time.
I know the feeling. I know the feeling. Um, Christopher Collins writes back in and he says, and he's kind of asking the same thing, but he's asking, what got you interested in writing to the point where you got published? So now we know that your wife encouraged you to do a submission. Is that where that all started?
I don't. I can't recall a time when I did not want to write. It goes all the way back to the mid 1940s when I was probably 10, 11 years old. I attempted to write a Batman novel. I also started a science fiction novel, and something about the Canals of Mars was the title. Canals of Mars. I'm not sure I ever got much of it written, but I started it. And I think that I just love science fiction. The science fiction thing got me started. The Flash Gordon serial got me started. I was only 4 years old when my father took me to see that. And after that, I never walked away from science fiction. It became a lifelong passion. I switched over into comic books. The comic books helped me learn how to read. That was one of the things when I was teaching. I had chances to talk to parents of kids in grade school, and they talked about, how the kids weren't reading the way they should be. And I said, well, get the books that they want to read. Comics if you have to, but get them, take them to stores, buy cook. For example, this problem we're having now about homeschooling, and parents are trying to teach their kids at home. Why go through all that? Get them something that they want to. Take them to a store. Let them pick out a couple of things they'd be interested in. Bring them home. Let them read. Even if it's only a comic book, if it's Superman or Captain Marvel. I actually did some research on it when I was teaching in New Hampshire, and the vocabulary in most of the comics was at a level that was beyond the level of most of my students. Not all of them, but a lot of them. That wasn't a knock on those kids. Those kids were fine, but the vocabulary in the comics is at a reasonable level. We sort of laugh at comics, but the vocabulary is there. Get a kid reading comics when he's in the second grade, first grade. That's going to do wonders. Well, I think it will. Anyway, it did wonderful things for me.
Yeah, just a personal story on that. And you lead me to a lot of different places in my past, and one of them is when I was very young. I think I might have been about 8, and I was a terrible reader. And I discovered Spider-Man comics. And just like you just said, I learned how to read, and it taught me a lot about life. And yeah, I agree with you. Just let kids get books and read, or comics and read. There's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, Ray, I'm like you, except Spider-Man grew up in the same neighborhood I did, Forest Hills. So that was the real reason I was reading. I was trying to find out where he and Aunt May lived.
Did you ever find them, Dan?
Nope. And Forest Hills seems to have disappeared from the movies pretty much. So I guess I'll never find out.
What was one of the interesting things about the radio broadcast? I grew up in the radio era, and I'm not sure why it was, but I've never connected with television the way I connected with the radio shows. Maybe it was because I was 7 years old. I'm not sure. But I feel as if I spent a lot of time in those early years hanging out at the Daily Planet with Lois and Clarke. Spent time at the TM bar with Tom Mix and Sheriff Mike Shaw. I flew in a plane with Joyce Ramsey. I like the female. I don't know what that is, but Captain Midnight Secret Squadron. Joyce Ramsey went off at a time when all the women and pretty much everything else that I saw were always, every time things got tight, they fainted. Joyce Ramsey went off and fought chaps. In the Second World War. And that was my kind of work.
Well, for Star Trek fans.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
For Star Trek fans who may want to find something interesting, don't forget that Nimoy and John Delancey did a series of live radio shows in the late 90s that were on PBS and elsewhere. And I'm sure they're popping up on YouTube. And just turn off the video and listen to a radio play with John Delancey and Leonard Nimoy.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
You know, you brought up an interesting point about radio. And when I was very young, I used to actually eat breakfast with my grandparents, and they would have the radio on. And I'm wondering if you just mentioned that you were more enamored with radio than television. Uh, do you think that radio caused you to see things as you wanted to see them, as opposed to seeing things as someone else was presenting them?
It's possible. I know that I was more emotionally caught up. I had more of the sense of being alive in the action in the radio shows. On the television things, I was always looking at stuff on a screen. But the radio shows, I was listening to the characters, and I was kind of in it, in the conversation with them. I can't explain that, and I've never done any research on it, so I don't know. It's just my imagination at work. But
Yeah, well, I think radio's been replaced by blogging. So I wonder if it's what goes around comes around. But it's interesting because there's no video and you have to listen. And in some cases, they're actual stories and you have to visualize the activities.
yeah, well, to this day, my favorite comedians are people like George Burns and Jack Benny. You know, the
So
radio guys.
there's a few people writing in. I think you've hit home on a couple of things because someone's talking about Bob Kinney wrote that comic books and TV Guide were his, how did he phrase it? You know, he learned how to read as a young man from comics and TV Guide. And TV Guide showed him where he could go and what he could watch. So that was kind of interesting. And Chris Collins writes back and says he used to listen to The Shadow. Or is it, yeah, he used to listen to The Shadow. So it's very interesting how it kind of brings back memories.
Lamont Cranston was an old friend of mine.
Lamont Cranston. So let me just ask you maybe, you know, sort of finally, and this is more of I want to say a personal thing, but, you know, we've all been stuck at home for months due to the pandemic, and we'd like to know maybe what are your thoughts about the world today, and do you think we'll ever see any futures that you wrote about?
I never saw this future coming. I never would have believed this. First of all, I would not have. I'm not sure whether I want to get into politics or not, but I would not have believed that we would have a president like this one. Let me just say that, and I'll let that go at that point. But yeah, I never saw this. Did not expect to run into a pandemic, I guess. That was something that it's always back in the 1920s, and I thought medically we were ahead of all that stuff and we would never see it again. But that shows you what I know. But this is a much darker America than I would have ever expected to see.
What has that done to your writing, Jack, as you've been at home? I mean, have you been looking at that window where that computer is and coming up with short stories left and right, or are you just looking for a chocolate milk and a cookie and to hide in a corner?
Yeah, it's me. I'm the chocolate milk and cookie guy. Oh, yeah, I've not been doing much short fiction. I've been concentrating on this novel, the Arrowhead Project is the title, and I've been concentrating on that for the last year or so. I got a cat here. Hi, Clemmy. How you doing, kid? And after I get it, I expect to be finished in another month or so. I should watch it. I hope by the end of October I'll have it done and have it in. At which point I want to get back and start writing some short fiction again. have some ideas, and but they're not. I don't think their ideas in any way sparked by what's going on around me. I think people have had probably enough of that. I'm not going to give them more of it.
Yeah, I guess
like the
writing
idea
should
of
be
Albert Einstein's wife finding fulfillment. That's my kind of story.
writing should be escapism, I guess, right?
Yes, yes, absolutely, especially in this era.
Well, you know what? It's nice in a lot of respects that we could read novels of yours, watch things like Star Trek, and just, hope for a good future for all of us.
Yeah, I think we'll get there. I'm just not treating it as something automatic as I had been. All I'd seen for years was a better world coming, and now I'm seeing more of a bumpy ride than I used to.
There is one thing, though. We are going back to space. We've had man in space now. And when I first started interviewing you for stuff, we had no space flight per se. We were dwindling down with the shuttles, and now there's a brave new world out there. So I guess that's something to look forward to.
Yeah, well, it's that's another thing that's really odd. When I was first started reading science fiction, which is in the 40s, the Ray Bradbury and those guys were writing about we had settlements on Mars, and they were in the 1960s. And I thought that by the 60s or the 70s at the latest, I was going to know whether there was life on Mars. We would have people on Mars. At some point back in those early years, I thought maybe there might be something on Venus. And of course, then I found out how ridiculous that was. That was such a crazy planet. And then that story showed up. I assume you guys have all seen the story, that there might well be life on Venus. Hold on, let me. Come on, Clemmy. Clemmy, I got to get you out of here. I'll be back in 30 seconds.
Actually, I've learned in interviewing Jack in his home that the cat will leap up, but not that friendly. So I've certainly I've met the cats at the McDevitt house once or twice. So
that was Clemmy, and she's a good cat, and she's going to go out there and she's going to sulk and kind of glare at me when I. But yeah, but I don't know. It's I just to be honest, I just feel very fortunate to have been part of it. I can't imagine what my life would have been without science fiction. I got lucky. It's not as if you plan things; these things happen to you, and I just feel very fortunate. And a large part of what's made it work is that the guys like you, people who are readers and who become part of the thing.
well, we've been happy to have you at the studio because all volunteer run as we are, having somebody like you who's an author who has written so much, seeing our starship sets where we occasionally ask for a little help from friends to get productions going. You've just been nice to hang out and have some book autographings going on and talking at some of our little mini cons, and it's been a lot of fun. So thank you.
Well, it's been my pleasure, Dan. Thank you. You've been a lift.
Well, we really do appreciate you being here. We appreciate your friendship. Once all this hopefully blows over, we'd love to have you come back. And in the meantime, for the folks who are listening, in next month's issue of Asimov, which I believe is actually asimovs.com, just take a look. And actually, there's a little preview of the November-December issue. I guess still call it an issue, right?
Sure.
And it actually does mention Jack's story about the neutral zone. And without having said anything in that article, it just says that his story pays homage. And I don't think we could ask for anything more than that, Jack.
Well, What can I tell you, Ray? It's I've enjoyed myself thoroughly down there. You guys deserve some credit, and the people who are working with you. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And I'm very happy that you agreed to be with us. And I thought this was a wonderful interview. And hopefully sometime you'll join us again.
I was just going to say, I hope you invite me back.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
My pleasure.
Okay. So we're going to say goodnight to Jack. Jack, we have some end credits we're going to play that pays homage to you. And hopefully we'll see you all next week. So thank you guys for being with us. Let's see. Now you all know the problems that I've had, right? So we're gonna give it a try.